What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Raegan Moya-Jones. Raegan is the co-founder and former CEO of Aden Anais, the baby lifestyle brand globally recognized for its high-quality, design-driven muslin swaddles and baby products. Her success with Aden Anais earned her reputable awards, including being named as one of EY's Entrepreneurs of the Year, considered one of the most prestigious business awards in the world. Raegan has most recently co-founded St. Luna, a premium moonshine brand that was released in the US in March of 2019. Aside from founding, Raegan sits on the board of directors for Hopeland, a nonprofit created to help children who are separated from their family. Raegan is also the author of What It Takes, the story of her entrepreneurial journey from the kitchen table to a $100 million global business. And perhaps even more impressive than all of this, Raegan is the mother to 4 beautiful daughters. Raegan, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Carly. Lovely to be here.
Lovely to meet you. So, Raegan, what I love to do is I want to actually start from Raegan as a little girl, 5 years old, 10 years old. Who was she? Who were you as a kid?
I would say I was a very average kid. I grew up in a very working class household in Sydney, Australia. You know, went to public school, did all the things that kids in the 70s, which is really when I was raised, did. You know, played with sticks and balls out on the cul-de-sac street, you know, out the front of my parents' house. It was a simple time, but yeah, I had a very happy childhood. You know, it was pretty basic and just all about being with my family and my friends, really.
And Raegan, growing up, did you love school? What type of student were you? Were you passionate about school or no?
Did not like school. I was a bit of a rebel. School was a means to an end to me. I did get in a lot of trouble at school, which is, you know, something now with 4 daughters. I basically look them in the eye and lie about how I was as a student, you know. So, but no, I was not a fan of school. School was just an opportunity for me to be with my friends and hang out. Look, I did well in subjects, interestingly, where I liked and respected my teachers. And in the ones that I didn't, I was a problem child.
The ones you're passionate about, you leaned into.
Very much so, yeah. And it was very much about the teacher. You know, if I really liked the teacher, it could have been any subject that if I really liked my teacher and respected them, then I was all in.
And that seemed to follow through even through university, right? You ended up dropping out of university.
I did.
So tell me about that. How were you thinking through almost long-term? Were you thinking about long-term career where you wanted to be?
Definitely not. I've kind of winged it my entire life. That's the way I roll. I got into university despite having not tried very hard at school. And you have to remember in Australia, especially back in the 80s when I went to university, it was not something that everyone did like in the States. Whereas, you know, I always say to my girls, you know, if you don't get a college degree, you're not going to get a job at Shake Shack flipping a burger as Americans. It's just something that you have to do. In Australia, it was definitely not like that, and it's still not as much like that as it is in the US. So I got into university. I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. I just got into university. So I ended up doing a communications degree. And I remember I was sitting on part of the university. I was sitting there with a group of people, and some guy, I think he was pre-med, came up to me and said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm doing a communications degree." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, marriage 101." And I went, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, we call that marriage 101. I go, "What does that mean?" He goes, "Well, all you're going to be able to do when you graduate with that degree is get married. It's not good for anything." And I went, "Okay, well, that seems like a waste of 4 years." So then I don't even know how I got to that. Then I went, "Oh, well, I'm just going to drop out." And then I went and lived on an island in the Whitsundays for a year, waitressing and bartending and having the time of my life. But that's what I did, and I never went back. Or that's not true. I did go back to formal education years later. I did a postgraduate degree.
First of all, it's funny because him saying that, in my mind, I was like, wow, communication is so key to marriage. Maybe you're going to be a great wife, or you know what I mean? I thought that was the unlock, but definitely different.
It was a diss for sure.
Yes. And given that you went to Europe, you were bartending, like you said, where was that moment in your early career, early life when you were like, okay, I need to start thinking about what do I want to do long term, or I need to get a job that's probably more sustainable?
That was really my dad who was calling me going, "What the hell are you doing? You can't live on an island for the rest of your life." And I'm like, "Well, actually I can, but probably don't." But it was my dad, and my dad was the Australasian sales director for Pfizer. He was in pharmaceuticals and in sales. He also was, I'd say, an entrepreneur. He had a business, it went broke. So I probably got a little bit of that from my dad, not the going broke part, but the entrepreneurial part. And it was really my dad started to get on me about, come on, it's time to think about what you're going to do. And I honestly, Carly, had no idea what I was going to do. So probably, again, slightly influenced by my dad, I just looked for a sales job and got into sales. And that sort of was the start of what I would call my career.
Yeah. And I love highlighting this as well, just because, first of all, it's quite common, right? So many people around this age have no idea what they want to do. Or at least even more so on the surface, they act like they do. So then it stresses everyone else out. Like there's this interesting dynamic that happens, especially in the US and college and culture and everything. So I love just highlighting.
Pressure. It's just too much pressure. It's like for instance, my ex-husband, he's an electronic engineer. That's what he went to school to do. He hated it. But his father was like, "This is what you're going to do." And his brother's an engineer. He's a chemical engineer. So they were very much pushed into that. So there was no question they were going to be engineers. Chilean engineering is more prestigious in Chile than doctors, lawyers. So that was just what they had to do. But now in his 50s, he says, "I never really wanted to be an engineer. I was just told that's what I had to do." So my parents never sort of pushed. And look, I'm in the same situation now with my 4 daughters. I want them to do what they want to do, but they don't really, except for one, our second daughter, very clearly she's studying veterinary science and everything, so she wants to be a vet. So that's very clear. But the other 3 haven't got a clue. And it's hard, and not many 18-year-old kids do know exactly what they want to do with the rest of their life. So it's a lot of pressure.
So around this time, or maybe even a few years later, who you mentioned your ex-husband, but at the time he was your boyfriend, you end up, he needed to move to New York to open up a New York office, right? And so
wow, you really have done your research. I'm impressed.
So you end up going with him, and it seemed like it was actually a fairly easy decision for you. You visited New York, you were like, this is it.
Loved New York. The first time, one of my closest friends grew up in New York, in Queens, and we worked together in an advertising agency. And she was going back to New York, and she said, "Do you want to come?" And I was like, absolutely. I was one of those people that the minute I was on the Triborough Bridge going into the city and I could see New York opening up in front of me, it just hit me like a lightning bolt. I was like, this is where I belong. I had that kind of reaction to New York. So when Marcos said to me, I've been offered this opportunity to go to New York for 2 years and do this, and we'd only been dating for about a year, he said, I'll take it if you come, and if you don't, I think this might be something between us. I went, are you kidding? Bags are packed, and off we went. And 2 years turned into 24 and 4 American daughters, and that was sort of how it all played out.
Can you walk me through that process? Because there was even that little bit of a time period before you ended up at The Economist. You worked in sales for a good chunk of that early career before founding Aden Anais, which we'll get into. But how did you ultimately traverse through that? How did you navigate, okay, let me find this career?
New York specifically was tough because I just packed up and went over there. I had no visa. We weren't married. So I couldn't work in New York without a visa. I couldn't work in the US without a visa. Turns out that the Australian consulate is considered a part of Australia, so you don't need to actually have a visa as an Aussie to work in the Australian consulate. So I ended up just getting a job at the consulate doing data entry, which I hated so much. So I used to bring it home at night and make Marcos do half of it because I was like, this is hell.
I didn't know that.
That's
great.
Actually, I don't think I've ever admitted that out loud in all the interviews I've done, but that is actually the truth. I'd bring home reams and go, can you just enter that for me? Because, I can't be bothered. So I did that. And then I met a friend, interestingly, who ended up being the co-founder of Aden Anais, Claudia, which that didn't go well. And I became friends with Claudia because she was the ex-girlfriend of Marcos's best friend in Australia and the only person we knew in New York. And Claude's worked for a company called IIR, which is a conference company. They put on conferences. Anyway, very long story short, Claudia helped me get a job with IIR. And they actually, and this is probably illegal, but whatever, it was 25 years ago, they allowed me to work there whilst they were going through the process of getting my H-1B visa.
Got it.
So I worked there for about 9 months without being paid whilst the visa was being, processed. And then once I got the visa, they backdated all my pay.
Got it. So ultimately, what landed The Economist? How did you navigate that and find that job?
One of the girls that worked at IIR, Christina, who ended up being an early investor in Aden Anais. Now I'm saying this, it's like, oh, wow, what a small little circle it was, really. So Christina, who became a good friend, she had moved over to The Economist because The Economist had a conference group as well. They used to put on government roundtables and industry specific. So we moved over to the conference division of The Economist newspaper. So that's how I moved over.
And you worked, like you said, you worked in sales. My hunch, given everything else that you've ended up doing afterwards, is that sales actually came quite naturally to you. Is that true?
Yes, very naturally. I was at the risk of sounding obnoxious. I was very, very good at it. I made lots of money for the companies that I worked for. So yes, I was always successful in the sales roles that I was in. And
I'd love for you to talk through your experience at The Economist. Most notably, I think a lot of people can relate to this, especially women in sales, whatever it may be, in that this was maybe the first time in your career where you were seeing your success and it was very evident, although you weren't getting, whether it's promotion, you weren't getting rewarded for it internally. Can you talk a bit through that and how whether it's advice for others to navigate through that?
Well, sadly, it wasn't the first time. So I really experienced it. I worked for Schwarzkopf in Australia, which is a big hair care brand out of Germany. And I remember distinctly talking, again, I was the top salesperson always, very successful salesperson. And I was talking to my boss about the fact that I didn't want to just be the sales rep forever and wanted to do something more. And he said to me, if you want to be taken seriously, Raegan, then you need to start wearing longer skirts.
Wow.
So I could write a book about all that. And I'm sure most of us women can. And to be clear, it was, I'm going to age myself now, but there was a show called Ally McBeal. I don't know if you know. Yeah, there you go. So it was a very famous show back in I think the early 90s. And her look, she was a lawyer, and her look was, a suit jacket and sort of short skirts. It was the look then. So, it wasn't like I was wearing micro minis. I was wearing what then
professional.
Was so, but I remember being so pissed off that he said that. I was like, oh, what hope do I have here? And so I started looking elsewhere and then ended up in pharmaceuticals. But yes, exactly. The fast forward to The Economist, which was probably, I don't know, 8-10 years later.
Yeah.
And the same thing every time I said, look, I don't really want to just keep doing this forever. And that I was always met for, no, this is where we see you. It was just very obvious to me that there wasn't a career trajectory for me at The Economist. So that's when I started to really think hard about, if I'm going to be taken seriously, I'm going to have to do something myself, because I don't fit the mold either of a serious career person. I always had fun at work. I never took myself seriously. I was not somebody that was in awe of hierarchy, and I would talk to the CEO of The Economist exactly the same way as I would talk to the lady who used to come into my office at night to clean it.
Yeah.
It was just the way I was raised. Humans are humans. Good for you for being the CEO, but the respect I give you is exactly the same as the respect that I give the cleaning lady, which is what I moved into the culture of Aden Anais, which I firmly believe is why that business was as successful as it was.
And even, I want to note too, it wasn't a matter of you not advocating for yourself. You were confident enough to have those conversations, but it became a point where it just was out of your control, right?
So obvious.
Yeah.
Like that it was just, I remember meeting with one of the managers. There was I can't even remember what the role was, but it was obviously a step up from where I was. And I was having breakfast with him, and he goes, look, you just don't have the qualifications. I go, what qualification? He goes, well, you don't have a degree. I said, well, I have a master's. I didn't do the undergraduate degree.
Right.
I'm like, but what does it matter? The results that you can clearly see, shouldn't that count for more than the piece of paper that someone got 15 years ago? I don't get it, but it was just never going to happen. And again, I get that I'm not easy to understand and I guess put in that box of managerial material, I guess. But it was very frustrating nonetheless.
That frustration combined with you had your first daughter. And
yes.
Tell me a little bit about that unlock and ultimately, what became Aden Anais. Tell me a little bit about that origin story and that unlock of saying, you know what, there's something here while you were working at The Economist.
Well, first and foremost, I was never having children. So the joke's on me that I ended up with 4 and then running a global baby product business. So that's just hysterical in itself.
Oh my God.
So
yeah.
if you spoke to any of my high school friends, they would be like, Raegan will be the least likely person to have children.
Was that because you were was it career driven? Like you wanted to do your...
Yes, I was, quite honestly, I was a bit of a party girl. I was just all about having fun and traveling and I guess very
just living
selfish.
life. And kids would bring you.
And I knew that kids was going to be about the kids. So, and I wasn't maternal. I was never the girl that would see a cute baby, oh, cute baby. I was like, oh, God, that looks like a lot of work to me, sort of thing. And in fairness, children didn't really like me either. It was a mutual, dislike of each other, which changed very much. And then as my closest friends started to have children, it was my relationship with kids changed because I loved them because they were, the people that I loved.
Is this early 30s to give context? Around your early 30s? Okay.
Yes, early. Well, I had Anais at 36, so I had my babies later because I wasn't planning on having babies. And then one day I just went, you know what? Actually, I don't really want to be sitting around the holidays on my own. Like the idea of having a family around me. And then once I had an A, initially I was like, what the hell have I done? I actually said to my ex-husband, husband at that point, obviously, oh my God, I've made the worst mistake. This is not for me. I need to give it back. And Marcos went, give it back to who? I go, I don't know. And it was I definitely had postpartum. So it was a really big thing, you know, the baby. I clearly got over it and then had 3 more. So then the girls and being a mother truly just, I would go as far as to say it saved me, because it gave me a real purpose that I didn't realize I needed. So it was, you know, the greatest thing that I ever did in my life was have my girls.
So ultimately founding Aden Anais, you realized there was a gap in the US market. So take me through that.
Yes. So how that happened very quickly, my sister, my younger sister, had my nephew Rio 6 months before I had an A. So I was watching Paige's journey with Rio, and we're very close, super close, even though we were living on the other side of the world. And every time I would talk to her, she would have these pieces of muslin, which were just white cotton, and she used 10 of them a day to swaddle into, you know, all. Now muslin, talking about it now, every mum pretty much knows what muslin is, but no one in America knew what it was before Aden Anais came along. So Paige, I said, can you send me some of those over, because you can't get them here. So Paige sent me a pack of 4 white ones. And then when I had an A, I also used them in the same way. And I just thought, every Aussie parent can't have this wrong, that we can't live without these things. So I'm sure if I introduced them to the US, American parents would feel the same way. Then I went, they don't just have to be white. I can make them beautiful as well and put designs on them, because they were a very utilitarian, simple 4 white ones that came in a cellophane pack. No one had sort of turned it into a design-driven sort of idea. So that was really how it happened. And then I just went about trying to work out how the hell to make them, because I had no textile experience. I had no business experience other than sales.
And Raegan, can you just highlight a little bit about what did your day look like, right? Your day job, you have a new baby, and then you're obviously starting a company. Tell me a little bit about the hours and how, I imagine, exhausted you were.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I do look, people say to me, how did you do it? Especially as I kept having children and kept going, you know. How did I do it? I was extremely passionate about what I was doing, because not just because I wanted to build the business, which was very much a driving force, because I needed to prove to myself and all these people that kept telling me that you're just good as the salesperson, that I was actually capable of a whole lot more.
Yeah.
And it was really the passion for what I was doing, and this really strong desire to prove to myself that I could do it, and to others, me first and foremost, but definitely to all the people that had told me, no, you can't, sort of thing. So that's really what drove me through that absolute insanity of juggling everything that I was juggling. So yeah, I would get up, I would obviously, you know, deal with Anais, do the mum stuff in the morning. Then I would go to what I used to call my real job at The Economist. I would do that. Then I would come home. I would be with Anais once I got home. And then once Anais was in bed, that's when I would focus on Aden Anais. So I really built Aden Anais in the middle of the night for the first 3-4 years. And yeah, I would work from sort of, Anais would go down about 7:30, and then I would work until probably 3 every morning.
So social life, all of that was scrapped as quickly as overnight. That's what it seems, but how would you balance that? Was there a balance?
I always found time to have a drink with my friends. I don't remember ever going, I can't do this. Look, when you're a new mum and you're with a newborn and the baby's a little, you know, the focus is very much your children and your family anyway. It's not like you're out every every night. And that was, I think that also was part of a little bit of the postpartum for me. Mind you, when Anais was a newborn, it was such early stages of Aden Anais. It was concept, and I was just trying to work out how to do it. So it was when Lourdes, our second daughter, was born, that it really started to become that madness of working into the middle of the night or early morning and stuff. Yeah.
And there was seems like one very key metric that you established for yourself in order for you to confidently say, okay, I'm leaving The Economist, I'm leaving my real job, and I'm going to do this full time. What was that, and what was the logic behind it?
I had read statistically that only 2% of all women-owned businesses ever get to $1 million in revenue. So I sort of I took that on, and then I remember sitting in my office at The Economist and pulling up numbers going, wow, we've got to $1 million in revenue, and I'm just doing this on the side. And that statistically is not very common.
Yeah.
So once I did that, then I started to think maybe this could be something that I could really turn into something. And that was then the motivation to have the courage to leap.
And Raegan, first of all, what I love so much, whether you realize it or not, is I think the concept of proving people wrong is such a strong motivator. And it seemed
Absolutely.
like it came up, I even think of my own, soccer journey in college and whatnot. Like that was even just having excuse my language, like FU, in my mind to people.
Absolutely.
Like, it's a really strong motivator. So I just love that you shared that through your own process and whatnot. So that's great. Yeah. And okay, let's get into what seems like that first big hiccup in the road is maybe what we like to call it with your co-founder, Claudia. You mentioned that obviously, you guys went into it as best friends. Maybe skills-wise, you actually overlapped a good amount with marketing and sales. But then,
excellent point.
But then ultimately, what did you learn from it and what ended up happening?
Well, it was horrible. So, because I lost a friend out of it, and I speak very candidly about being very careful with who you go into business with. And if you do go into business with friends and family, make sure that everything is on the table from the get-go, so there's no grey area. And when I say that, I mean legally make sure everyone understands where everyone stands. That said, I don't think you can fully protect yourself from what could come down the road when you're working with friends and family, but that's an aside. So it was very much, I think, it was the disparity between our financial situation. So Claudia and her husband were very financially successful. Marcos and I, we were doing fine, but we were nowhere in their league. So I think what happened, and to this day, I maintain that I think it was primarily Claudia's husband that was the driving force of this isn't right, that we're funding it much more than they are. Now, to be clear, every check they wrote into the business was at 10% interest. It was not like they were, but it just, and I understand it. I'm not sitting in judgment as to why it happened, why she did what she did. But the very long story short was I think that they were very frustrated that I couldn't keep up financially, and it was getting to the point where the business was needing more and more money. We were borrowing money off Mark's father, $250,000. We'd borrowed off them. Again, the business which I knew I was responsible for half of. But I think that was sort of the beginning of the end. And yeah, it just got very ugly and horrible, and
it got to a point where essentially irreparable in a way, right? Like it was totally a very clean. Okay.
Oh no, it was far from clean, Carly. It was horrendous, but it was, and I talk about it in detail in the book. But and I do that because I want other entrepreneurs to really think long and hard about who they're going into business with. And when I do still talk to entrepreneurs and advise them and everything, they ask me, I said, look, it's a lonely thing founding a business on your own, and you're tempted to have that person but my advice would be, if you can, do it on your own, then do it. And if not, make sure that you still have the controlling interest in your business if it's your idea and everything. So there's ways to sort of limit the risk.
Right. And that notion will come up again when we talk about ultimately the end of your at least involvement in Aden Anais. But before that, actually, even real quick on choosing a co-founder, because I think it's such an important part of the journey. And I obviously see it a lot through my job. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts of the founders who actually want a co-founder because they need that complementary skill set, whether it's technical skills, but that actual, relationship comes a bit artificially, or at least you seek it out. Do you have thoughts on that?
You mean the people? I've seen that. It's very interesting to me, actually, because I've noticed that on LinkedIn and things like that, people are actually advertising for a co-founder. I'm like, what are you doing? This is such another level because of the unknown of the person. I guess it's like hiring somebody and you can get it right. But, look, even, and I think the biggest thing with Claude's and I was that we did have complementary skills. She was definitely more marketing. I was more sales, but that's very intertwined, right? Whereas if she was a finance guru and I was the sales and marketing guru, or the other way around, that might work differently when you're bringing different skill sets to the table from the beginning. So I think that's key. But you just can't predict how people are going to act and behave. And look, I honestly believe that if I didn't have control of Aden Anais wouldn't have been what Aden Anais was.
Absolutely. Because
I didn't have to ask anybody what their opinion was. Mind you, I did. I ran the culture was very inclusive. I sought out everybody's opinion, but ultimately it was my decision in the end. And I think when you've got an equal founder and everything is, what do you think? What do you think? It becomes quite a battle, and I'm not sure that you get the best results from that. I'm 100% sure there'll be people listening to this going, she's wrong. I know these two partners that work brilliantly together, but I'd say that it wouldn't be the norm.
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, every which way, I can say the same thing with, friends who started, husband and wife who started. Like at the end of the day, I think there are stats probably that back everything up, but I think sure, it works for some people, right? Like there's a different recipe for everyone to find that success, but I think from your lessons, it's totally valid and understandable.
And I do think it's about the lanes, right? So if you've got two founders, equal founders, I'm talking 50, so you have equal say. If one person is the tech guru and the other person is the marketing guru, and you stay in your lanes and you're not trying to tell the tech guru as the marketing person what they should be doing and vice versa, I think that's different. But Claudia and I, we played in the same sandbox, so it was tough.
Absolutely. And you even mentioned this before, but the importance of people. And I want you to talk a little bit about how you obviously grew Aden Anais to over $100 million business, which is incredible. And with that comes a lot of growing pains, right? Whether it's hiring, delegation, kind of relinquishing control to others in terms of kind of hoping that your vision gets translated well to them. So talk me through a little bit of your mindset and your process for hiring people and how you evaluated their skills rather than maybe someone else would.
In the very early stages, everyone I hired was somebody that I knew or I'd worked with effectively, or somebody who I knew who then brought in somebody they knew. So the initial sort of, I'd say, dozen people, it was very, there was a bit, I guess, a form of nepotism.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but it was based on, I knew their work ethic. I knew them, who they were as people. It was, so I knew that. And they weren't necessarily coming in with the skills of the role that I needed them to fill at the time. So that was sort of how it started. And then as we grew, I realized that really was the key to hire. And I've been challenged on this, like-minded people, and people have said to me, well, you just wanted to hire everybody like you. And I said, no, there was huge diversity in our company. Right. It was more about the core human features that I cared very much about, which was, kindness, humor, work ethic, into just basic intelligence, not necessarily, academic or specific intelligence,
the badges
around
that people
a
like
role.
to collect. Yeah,
exactly. I never even looked at where anyone went to school. I didn't care. I would meet them. If they were good people, if I knew that they would fit culturally into the group that we already had, then, and I got the sense that they were hardworking, and you can usually tell that if somebody has had a retail or worked in a fast food restaurant while they're at school. Anyone who does that, you go, okay, they're workers. So I looked for the human traits rather than the specific skill sets of roles.
That was the unlock for the early stages, right? Like, how do you scale that? How do you can't meet everyone that you're hiring as you grow. How did you scale it?
I did for a very long time because the culture was so extraordinarily important to me. As we got bigger and bigger, like the managers who were hiring for their team, they would obviously do all the groundwork, but because I'd put people in that I trusted and I knew that they understood the fundamental culture of Aden Anais and what was extraordinarily important to me in terms of hiring, then they were looking for those similar kinds of people. And then I would just come in and, they would go, we just need the Raegan, final stamp of approval on these people. And sometimes I would say, I just don't think this person will be a good fit. I would get a gut feel, and they would go back to the drawing board, and they trusted me. So, but then as we got bigger, and quite honestly, once private equity got in and started to get involved and everything, then it all went to shit because, they cared very much about the piece of paper and where people were from and what their credentials were. And that was the house of cards moment. That's when it all started to go pear-shaped.
So let's get into that, because I know you've had, your fair share of experiences where having a PE, private equity firm invest in you first, it was actually a very positive experience from my understanding.
Extraordinarily positive.
And then, so take me through kind of that experience, and then ultimately another PE fund comes into the mix, and that's where kind of shit hits the fan. So walk me through that, and we'll get into that a little.
So initially, most entrepreneurs know that one of the toughest things you're ever going to do, especially as a woman, which I didn't realize at the time, but after writing my book and researching for my book, I realized, I think I probably had as hard a time as I did because I had boobs, So I was trying to raise money, and it was extraordinarily tough. So I was scratching and clawing for a very long time. I was borrowing money off friends and family at 10% interest, anybody who would write me a check just to keep the lights on, because we were growing so fast, I couldn't keep up with the growth.
By the way, what were investors saying to you? Were they didn't believe in the product? They didn't, I'm guessing they were mostly men.
Yeah.
But what was the response given that the metrics were there? Yeah.
In all honesty, I don't remember. I just remember a lot of no's. That's what I remember from banks, for even getting and all these, small business loans and everything. I never had any luck with any of them. It was like the process of trying to get them, and then it was always a no. I was like, this is some bullshit. Like, I don't know what this is about. But anyway, so that's when I turned to family and friends, and I was taking $40,000 checks. I was taking $250,000, anything anyone would write me. I was like, please, so I can keep the lights on. So I did that for a long time. And then very serendipitous, because I'm going to go on the record here and say that I do think building successful businesses, there is a huge element of luck, serendipity, being in the right place at the right time. I don't care what anyone says, that is a factor for success. There's no doubt in my mind. So when it came to the money side of things, one of my early investors in Aden Anais, who came in when Claudia and I broke up, and so I didn't have the money to buy out her 50% share. So I had to go to my friends and say, here, so they wrote checks into the business. So one of my early investors, who very good friend, I'm the godmother of one of their children, her husband worked for Credit Suisse at the time. He knew these investors that he said are just such good people. In all of the people that he'd met in that space, he goes, these are the good guys. He said, I was a rounding error to them. So he didn't at the time think they would write a check, but he just reached out to them for me and said, look, this very good friend needs some help. The business is growing incredibly fast and she's struggling to fund it.
To keep up with it, yeah. And
And so long story short, that was Seidler Equity Partners. They're out of California. I met Bob and Matt, who are the Seidlers, two of the founding partners. Well, Bob is, and Matt came in much later. But they, again, long story short, we just hit it off and they ended up writing me a check. And again, a rounding error check in the sense I was not a normal investment for them. But I would say we just had a connection, and to this day, I'm still good friends with them. Right. And they kind of saved me at that point, and they were extraordinarily great partners. They left me alone to run the business. And I guess now saying that, and I've never actually thought about this before either, the fact that we were a rounding error was probably had something to do with the fact that they were very comfortable, like, letting me go. So that was an extraordinary partnership for a few years. And then they were the ones who said to me, look, I was paying myself no money. I was only paying myself enough to pay my nannies. I was paying everybody else around me more than me, and they basically said to me, why don't you take some chips off the table? And I was so naive. I didn't even know you could do that. I didn't know, I could sell the business, buy back into the business so that I could have a second bite at the cherry, but take enough money off to buy my apartment, put money away for my kids for school, just set myself up financially. So I did that. And that's when Swanda Pace came in, who were the complete antithesis of, just hell. I go back to that day and go, oh my gosh, if I could change one moment in my life, I have no regrets, but I totally regret bringing them into the business.
Looking back now, even when you look at that, is it a clear difference between the two? What would you do some due diligence difference or?
Yes, two things.
Yeah.
I've written about this too. There were two things again, and in my naivety. And I just want to go and finish up on Seidler Equity. I say that, I was a rounding error, but I have introduced them to other entrepreneurs, that much bigger, they're $1 billion fund and all the rest of it. And they treat all of their portfolio partners, company partners and founders and everything the same way as they treat me. So that was just who they were as people and the way they ran their business. So I've talked about this many times with them, and we invest in the founders, they will walk away from a business that they know could be financially successful if they don't feel good about the person that's running it. So they invest in the people and their vision as much as they do the balance sheet. Yeah. So
And they had a track record to prove that out.
Track record, and continue to. You know, if you look up Seidler Equity, there is nothing but great things out there.
Wow.
They just don't get it wrong. You know, they're an extraordinarily successful fund. Swanda. So, and the thing that kills me, and I speak openly about it because I refuse to sign, you know, what's it called? NDAs. And when they fired me, I've refused. I always said, no, I'm going to tell the truth.
Which, by the way, I just want to even caveat this with is, one, it is so much more common than people realize how you were treated. But what's so incredibly unique, and I'm so I just feel lucky to have you share this here, is that you're actually the few that do share it. It's just not that open, but it is so common because there's a lot associated with it. So anyway, continue. But I just wanted to.
And I'm glad you raised that, because the 2 points that are reasons why people won't speak openly about it. First is they sign an NDA to get a payout, and I told them to shove the NDA where the sun don't shine. I was like, there's no amount of money that is going to stop me from telling other entrepreneurs this story. And the other thing, especially as women, because I know this is true, because I try not to read reviews, but I have read some reviews. Oh, she's just an angry bitch who's stuffed up her business, and she's trying to blame other people. So I know, and again, especially for women, when you say you were fired from your own company, people instantly go to, she must have made an absolute mess of that, you know. So there's the embarrassment of it, whereas I guess I'm confident enough in myself that I know the truth. The people who lived it with me know the truth, and that's enough for me. So if people beyond that want to form an opinion, that's fine with me. But I was so adamant to tell the truth about what happened. And what's also interesting is how many people have come out of the woodwork since I wrote that book and said, that happened to me. Even people who worked with Swanda, like, you know, they're like, I wish someone had have told me, you know. So the point of it was to get the truth out so that I could avoid this happening to other entrepreneurs if I could. So yes, so they came in. We just didn't see eye to eye at all about the way forward with the business. I was, again, back to my early career days, I was very easy to write off and put into a box of university dropout. You know, they went to Stanford, Yale, all these places. So in their mind, you know, what does she know? How could she know more than me? But I could fundamentally see what they were doing and where it was going. But to answer your question, the 2 things I wish I had have done, and any entrepreneur who goes through a process to sell their company, I wish I had have asked them how many of their portfolio companies still have the founder that they bought in with running or even involved. And it turned out that there was pretty much none. So had I have asked that one question, the writing would have been on the wall, you know, at the time, because they obviously tell you exactly what you want to hear when they're trying to buy your company from you. And then the second thing was the debt. You know, like they were just all about debt and putting so much debt on the company. And, you know, when we buy other companies, it would always be with debt, not equity. And that was, if I had have known that was, which is very PE for the most part and very un-Seidler. So I hadn't seen that with the Seidlers. Those 2 things would have been huge red flags and probably would have changed my decision of who I went with.
And so you get fired as a CEO, as the founder, always the founder, but as CEO, remind ourselves, you know, this is your baby. This is what you built. You know, it was entirely you that created this incredible company. And again, you're kind of there was a period where, you know, you weren't CEO, but you were still involved. I want to talk a little bit about that period afterwards, right? That, you know, like most people probably do, they go into a really hard place in life. What's my purpose? Who am I? Talk through that experience and what ultimately got you out of it that others can take away as well.
Absolutely horrible. And I definitely did throw myself into a very huge vat of wine for a number of years where I wasn't really doing well at all. They had absolutely knocked all the confidence out of me. No matter how hard I tried to fight that it was my fault. And because even before they fired me, they were telling me things like, you're not capable of taking this to the next level. We need to hire a superstar CEO. You don't know what you're doing. You're messing. There was a lot of that before they ultimately said you're fired. So I'd been beaten down. So that was very hard. So I had all that. So my confidence was definitely shook. You start questioning your decisions, how you got there, what you could have done differently. So it was a really tough time. Then, not a couple of years after that, global pandemic, then I go, all right, we're going to move the family back to Australia from there. So it was a chaotic time. So it was, it's been 6 years in March that I got fired. So, and it's really taken me up until about a year ago, I'd say, that I felt firmly planted with both feet on the ground. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was also trying to keep my daughters' heads above water and moving them to the other side of the world. I went through a divorce. I had a lot of personal stuff going on. So it was the combination of having been shook to the core, of being pushed out of my own business, watching, quite honestly, what they were doing to the business, which was exactly what I said would happen if they kept going in the direction that they did. So that was brutal, especially given I still had many millions of dollars invested in it, which all went away because they, stuffed it up. And so that was hard. So I lost millions from afar. That was brutal. And yeah, so there was a whole lot going on. So it took a while. How did I get out of it? Now I'm going to sound very woo-woo, but I hired a life coach who saved me.
Rachel.
Rachel.
Is it Rachel?
Rachel, look at you. You are such a good researcher. And she saved me and did a lot of reading, started to sort of try and, as Rachel always says to me, change the channel, Raegan. All you have to do is change the channel. Because I went from going, I'm a loser, look at what happened. I'd be watching all these other entrepreneurs and a lot of them friends of mine just, do incredible things. It was very hard, and I just kept thinking to myself, you're such a loser. How could this happen? And she kept saying to me, focus on all the great things you did and know that. So it was a process that I started to work on that, read a lot of books, just started to work on getting my confidence back because for whatever reason, everybody around me just keeps saying to me, the minute you decide to do the next thing, it's going to be successful because that's just who you are. That I had to find me again. And that took a lot and a long time. And I wouldn't say that I'm 100% back, but I'd say 90% back. So I'm finally sort of definitely wasn't ready to retire, even though I was very fortunate in that I did make a lot of money, even from the first sale, even after losing it. So, I'm very grateful for that Aden Anais did afford me financial freedom, but it's so much more than the money, so much more.
And first, I'm just like, thank you. I'm so happy that you shared that process, right? And I think you just highlighted it, but you were hit from so many different angles, whether it's personal life, your first baby with Aden and Anais, like the company you built and seeing, what ended up happening afterwards, all of these aspects. I love what Rachel said, change the channel. I'm going to use that because I think that is so powerful.
And so easy to remember in the moment as you're going down that horrible rabbit hole, right? If you can just go, stop this. Like, I can think this rather than this. It's a very powerful tool.
And it just highlights the power of our thoughts. Like, we can easily go down these terrible rabbit holes and say, you know, you're a loser, all of these things that we're fed, whether we're actually fed it or not, it's so easy to go down it. So I really love that message. And tell me a little now, what does today look like for Raegan, and what are you excited about?
As I said, I'm finally back in the room after, you know, being gone for half a decade. And I've just started working on a new business. Actually, I sound like such a hypocrite now, with two of my oldest friends who I went to school with. Although the idea was his, in terms of he's been in the grocery industry for a lot of years and has been wanting me to help him do something in the States. So we've just founded a new company called Wild Taste Australia, which is gourmet salts and everything. We're going to New York to do, this is the first time I've talked about it, we're going to New York to do our first trade show in June. So that's all very imminent. So I'm excited about that. And then I am working on actually getting back into some form of muslin. I get a lot of people asking me to do the bigger adult blankets, and Christina, my old PR agent, who is now a very good friend, and I were drinking wine together actually in your neck of the woods last year. And she's like, everybody keeps asking me, when's Raegan going to do those blankets again? And then we realized that the babies that were wrapped in Aden Anais, like her son's just gotten into college, he's a basketball player, he's just gone into a Division I school, and they take their Aden Anais blanket with them because they love it. Like, these are 6'8" men now. But Christina and I worked out that the kids that were wrapped in Aden Anais are now going to college. So I'm like, well, how cool is that? They can take their adult muslin blankets. So anyway, I'm working on that, and that'll be fun.
So Raegan, are you saying then that Prince George will likely be repping a new muslin blanket from you?
Hopefully, that would be awesome. Yeah.
That's incredible. Okay, so given all of these experiences, these founding journeys, if you will, that you've taken on and that you are taking on now, what aspects of yourself have you learned most strongly that you've learned at each, or at least at this step, but from your whole experience?
Well, I'd say that, you know, you can get knocked down, but resilience and hard work is what really matters. You know, so I think I like to think that I won't be, and again, this is sounding obnoxious and it's not meant to come out this way, but that I won't be remembered for Aden Anais. I'll be remembered for the story of falling into that very deep, dark hole and climbing back out of it, and then accomplishing what's next. You know, and having 4 daughters, they've seen it. They've lived it firsthand with me. They've seen me fall into that hole. They've seen their mum struggling. They've seen her go from this super high to this horrible low. So it's my job as their mum now to show them that you can get back to that super high and beyond. So I'm very much motivated by doing that for my daughters now, whereas before it was to prove to myself that I could, so I kind of ticked that box, whereas now my real motivation is to show my daughters you can fall into the hole but get yourself back out of it.
And let me just say, I love how at one point, even in this conversation, you were talking about how you didn't have maternal instincts and you didn't want to have kids. And now your whole, you know, that mission and that underlying drive really stems from being that role model for them. So I love that. And so let's go into more fun questions, if you will. Fun for me, but let's see. So I'm actually so curious, do you meditate and do you do some form of affirmations? Like, what does that look like in your life, if so?
Yes, so that was very much a learned practice after I fell into the hole. So I'd never done it. I'd never meditated. what is very interesting, having gone through this journey of the last five years and becoming a much more spiritual person, is that I look retrospectively at my life and the way I built Aden Anais, and I was manifesting. I was actually drawing all of this great energy to me. It was happening organically without me really understanding what it was. And the dilemma I have now is that now I'm so consciously aware of that energy transfer, and I realize for the past 5 years that I've been drawing all the shit to me because it's been my energy. So I'm like, I've stayed in that dark place rather than, and I knew I was doing it. I knew I was dragging it to me, but I couldn't get out of it. So, now I've brought the light back in, and I'm finally starting to see my life change because of it. I watch it happen. It's a very real thing, So I do meditate. When I meditate, it's always a very positive thing. I'm bad. I'm sort of full on, and then I get distracted, and then I don't meditate for a while, and then I go, oh my God, why aren't I meditating? Because when I do, everything is so much better. So yes, I did myself and my second eldest daughter, before we left New York, we did a transcendental meditation course, which was the real start of my meditation journey.
And I want people to realize too that most people have that experience, but I think the experience meaning, thoughts come in, distractions, everything, but a lot of people actually reach the conclusion, meditation's not for me. Where I think that's not necessarily true. It's more of just like accepting the thoughts, going through that process. But
well, the notion of being able to have no thoughts for 20 minutes is ridiculous. You can't not have. That's why I would encourage anyone who's listening to this who says, oh, I can't meditate or it's not for me, learn transcendental meditation, because it's kind of like the gateway to meditation, and the process makes it simple. When I realized it wasn't about not thinking anything for 20 minutes, that changed everything for me, because I'm such a wired person and 1,000,000 miles an hour. That's why I didn't think I could meditate either. But once you really understand it's a game changer.
Raegan, what craft are you spending a lifetime honing?
I want to say drinking champagne. Extremely
from
good
my
at
podcast that I've listened to, I feel like you've honed that.
I have honed that. So, okay, we'll go in a different direction. I would say happiness, being happy, living in the moment, that is new to me. So I was never satisfied with what I had. I always was, not from a materialistic standpoint, but just like I needed to prove I could do more, be more, acquire more, be more successful. Like, for instance, with these new business ideas that I'm starting to work on, it took me some time to realize that it's okay if they're not another $100 million business. It's okay, because I've set the bar for myself here, so I was like, well, could that be a $200 million business? Could that be a $300 million business? Now, I'm not saying that that's not still my goal, to make these more successful than Aden Anais, but I've given myself the freedom for them not to be. And that is very freeing when you go, it's okay if this only becomes a $20 million business. That's not a failure. That's still okay. So I would say what I'm still trying to hone is that, like the living in the moment and the definition of happiness.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I love that so much. Raegan, I could talk to you probably for another at least 2 hours. It has been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming and sharing your absolutely inspiring story. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. Thanks, Carly.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow, and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Verschow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.